Mr. President.
The senator from Delaware is recognized.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that proceedings under the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I come to the floor this morning to reflect on and remember a dear friend and colleague, someone who served this nation in this body for 30 years, someone who's already been remembered by many others as a trailblazer, someone who left a lasting mark on this Senate, on her state of California, on our nation. When I first came to this Senate now 13 years ago, Senator Feinstein was someone whose career I had long followed and long admired. She was elected to this body when I was a law student, in the year of the woman, when following a contentious hearing, there was a concerted effort made to recruit some of the strongest, most capable potential candidates to join this body, and Senator Feinstein was certainly among those incredible leaders. I had the honor, the blessing of being in small rooms in negotiations with her within my first few years, and saw behind the scenes what anyone who followed her publicly got to know about Senator Feinstein. She was tough. She was fierce. She was determined. She was prepared. She had always done the reading. She studied the details of every bill, every piece of legislation, everything we voted on. When I had the chance to join the Appropriations Committee, and I approached her once here on the floor to ask her consent to amend the Energy and Water Appropriations Subcommittee bill, she was floor managing. She turned, stopped, and said, "Are you asking my permission to file an amendment to my bill?" And somewhat haltingly, being still a very junior senator, I said, yes, ma'am, that is exactly what I'm doing. And she smiled and laughed and said, "Oh, aren't you nice?" And I said, "Doesn't every senator ask your permission before they attempt to amend your bill?" She goes, "No, they no longer do, but they should." She was always dressed to the nines. She was always gracious and dignified. She exuded a quiet power that in critical moments in the history of this institution and our nation, our country and world got to see. As the chair of the Intelligence Committee, determined to make public a tectonic struggle between this body and its role and the history of interrogation techniques that she and many of us concluded were inappropriate and broke the boundaries, determined to defend the prerogatives of the Senate, even in a very difficult and charged environment. Given her early experience in San Francisco and the tragedy that brought her from council president to mayor, she was a focused, persistent, effective advocate for gun safety. My friend and predecessor in this seat, now our president, President Joe Biden, served alongside Senator Feinstein for many, many years. And together, they worked hard to advance the Violence Against Women Act, the assault weapons ban, and dozens of other pieces of important legislation to help make our country more equitable, more inclusive, safer, and more just. I was reflecting this morning when I got the hard news about Dianne's passing last night. On the very first time I met her, I was a young man. I was just a year out of law school, and I was living and working in New York City for the I Have a Dream Foundation. And I happened to have a car. And a friend who I think was working for Mayor Dinkins called and asked if I would drive out to Teterboro Airport and pick up Senator Feinstein of California. I couldn't believe my luck, as a young man in his early 20s, to get a chance to speak for even a moment or two to a U.S. senator. Well, I drove out there and was sure to be on time and waited diligently, and had been told by some of the campaign staff to not expect that she would even speak to me. She insisted on sitting in the front seat next to me, and we chatted for almost an hour and a half as we made our way back into downtown Manhattan in heavy traffic. And I had the chance to listen to then new Senator Feinstein talk about her experience as mayor, make observations about how the city of New York was being run and what the issues were, and then to ask her a few questions about public service, about what motivated her, about why she worked so hard. As a very young man, that experience, that conversation stayed with me for years. And when I first came to this body and had a chance to sit near her on this floor and to serve down the dais from her on judiciary, I approached and repeated that story. And she said, young man, what I want you to remember is that every time you have a chance, whether with a page or an intern, with a campaign volunteer, you also have the opportunity and the obligation to remind them who we serve and why we serve. Senator Feinstein was a giant here. She showed what public service means. She was determined, she was capable, she was dedicated. Her last vote was yesterday. And I cannot imagine the loss that her family and staff are feeling, the enormous gap this will leave for the state of California and for this institution today and into the future, as we mourn the passing of this incredible trailblazer, and as we prayerfully reflect on her incredible legacy. Thank you, Dianne, for your decades of loyal